put your head down, don't engage, don't get in trouble, get your degree and leave. And they pretty much laughed in our faces and said, do what you like, go to the media. You know, they acted with impunity. Any Muslim that engages in activism, you're a left-wing liberal.
The standard default of Islamic societies across this country is not to engage. There is a quietism. Muslims should be at the center of that.
Yes, yeah.
But they're not.
Yeah.
So explain the work of Muslim Students for Palestine.
These images have struck every person who has a beating heart.
Universities around the world are probably involved in one of the most seminal moments of protest history. The Columbia University encampment has lit a fire that has inspired young people across the world, creating similar protests that are now taking place over university campuses here in the UK. Economic trade with Israel and the cause for divestment has been popularized, and as our guest last week told us, this contributes to the isolation of the Israeli apartheid state. Yet at a time when the world's youth are rising up for Gaza, it is probably not uncontroversial to state that Muslim students on university campuses are lagging behind. Recently, we helped convene the Muslim Students for Palestine network, a student-led grouping who have become disillusioned with the lack of Muslim student participation, especially that of Islamic societies. And this is a problem that needs urgent redress. Have we depoliticized our youth to such an extent that they feel the only expression of Islam comes in dua and charity, and seeking justice is stripped away from its essential qualities? Now, to help us understand this really important issue, I've invited onto the show Dr. Ayo Khalil. Dr. Ayo is a medical doctor, community worker, and former student activist who has spearheaded student political campaigns against Islamophobia, racism, and Israeli apartheid. He was also the vice president at Fosis in 2020, leading their political work. Dr. Ayo, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to The Thinking Muslim.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yeah, it's good to be here, alhamdulillah. Yeah.
Well, it's wonderful to have you with us, Dr. Ayo. In fact, Gaza has brought a lot of us together, and I would say that you in particular have really helped me understand, in particular, young Muslims and their mindset during this time. So, alhamdulillah, I think I attended a session where we were present, and I got a feel for some of your perspectives. But alhamdulillah, I really want to pick your brains really today and try to understand where things are when it comes to youth activism, Muslim students, Islamic societies, and Gaza, of course. So we've seen protests and encampments across the world. And I think it's fair to say that with a few exceptions, here in the UK, the Islamic societies haven't really been that active. In fact, I've spoken to some very notable Muslim scholars, and they've said it in an undiplomatic way. They've said it's been a deathly silence from Muslim students. I mean, why is that?
Yeah, I think, first of all, to start, I think in my mind, and I think in actual fact, in reality, there is often a difference between ISOCs, Islamic societies, and Muslim students. I think that ISOC sort of represents a structure of Muslim students, whereas there are Muslim students, many Muslim students, who either don't feel an affiliation with the ISOC, don't feel comfortable for whatever reason, and it's not a place that they may go in and out for Jummah and certain events, but they aren't part of the everyday sort of ISOC life and structure.
Yeah.
And I think there are a lot of Muslim students, particularly the ones who engage politically, like you've said, a lot of ISOCs have not engaged with what is going on in Palestine, at least externally and vocally. So these Muslim students, you know, go to the Palestine societies, or they go to independent sort of actions that they do themselves, or short-term collaborations with other organizations or other individuals. And I think there is that kind of split there. I think also, before we start, with different ISOCs, you will actually find that wherever you are in the country, whichever ISOC it is, you know, location, history, politics at that campus, the ISOC will be made up of different kinds of Muslims who have different kinds of beliefs and thoughts. And that actually fluctuates and varies through time as well. So I think with those disclaimers aside, I think when we're looking at the reasons why ISOCs are not engaging or have had a delayed engagement towards what is going on right now with the encampments and Palestine activism, I put down to 4 reasons. The first reason, I think, is one that a lot of people are aware of, is prevent. the Counterterrorism and Security Act that Prevent is part of 2015.
Yeah.
I think the second thing is this kind of model minority syndrome, is the way I'd put it. Put your head down, don't engage, don't get in trouble, get your degree and leave. The third one, I think, is overly restrictive religious practice and ideas of religious practice that you can find in some ISOCs. I think the fourth thing is that this thing that, politics is a thing for the left. It's not, politics isn't from Islam. We don't engage in politics. Doing this is haram, doing that is haram. Any form of political activism is haram, and it's not a characteristic a Muslim should embody. And we can go through, how that idea is actually antithetical to our faith, right? We have strong ideas of justice, strong ideas of engaging with society, embedded in our faith. So I think I'll just start with the first one, Bismillah, if that's all right.
Please.
So the first one with Prevent, I think, there's been a lot of education, orgs like Prevent Watch. During my time in Fosis, we used to have a Prevent training as well, to make ISOCs understand what is happening with Prevent and what is going on. And I think, during my time, I did feel like often the uptake from ISOCs was quite poor on that training.
Yeah.
And I think, within Muslim orgs, there is this kind of thing that, ISOCs don't engage, right, with a lot of these things. And I often found, because I led a casework department within Fosis as well, casework of Islamophobia and racism, when we wanted to be proactive with the training sessions and do them, before there was a crisis point, there wouldn't be much uptake. But when the crisis would come, people would be like, is there anything we can have, anything we can use? And actually, if this training was done before this crisis point, before Islamophobia or racism had taken place, then actually we could have been prepared, or we could have actually been able to, dealt with it in a more calmer way and demeanor, and actually led to better outcomes as well, not having to rush and not having to take in loads of information at one time. So when we look at Prevent puts a sort of legal duty on public sector workers, right? So doctors, nurses, teachers, university lecturers, right? Those who are sort of seen as public sector workers, to prevent terrorism, to prevent extremism. And the problem with this is that the definitions and the understandings of this by those public sector workers has often been very vague, right? And the guidance the government has put out on that has been, I think intentionally open-ended so that it is open to interpretation. And what this has meant is that it has given policing powers actually to, those who should be educators, right? And I think, I'm sure that the stats have probably been updated by now, but within the last sort of 3 or 4 years, the stats I was seeing is that a third of Prevent referrals were actually coming from the education sector.
Right.
Right. And at that time, I believe the police were referring about 18%, right, of those referrals will come from the police. So we're actually seeing a situation where educators are doing more referring and more active policing around counterterrorism than the police are, right, in when it comes to Prevent. And I think this is particularly damning. And this has actually stopped Muslim students from running for political office, within their students' unions. I know it's created this chilling effect, right? When we see cases, there's been cases, for example, of students who are reading books on counterterrorism, for example, for their study, who were either referred to Prevent or were questioned by their management and their security at the universities. We've seen students going through disciplinaries for protesting. I myself, in 2017, was put through a year-long disciplinary process because of protesting an IDF, who's engaged, ex-IDF soldier who had engaged in, war crimes, right? He had engaged in things which we wouldn't want to see on our campus, right? We don't want such individuals on our campus who've engaged in that kind of violence, right? And the university, painted us out to be anti-Semitic, so did Zionist sort of publications as well, painted us out to be anti-Semitic and violent and criminal, right? And all 5 of us were Muslims, and the way we were treated, at that time, out of those people, out of the 5 of us, few people actually stopped, engaging in activism completely, and we weren't actually really charged with anything.
Really?
Right? It was a long process to intimidate us, to subjugate us, to make us feel powerless. And with some people, they did actually succeed with that during that process.
And did that have an impact on the student community around you as well?
It did. Yeah. I think, for some time after, the Palestine Society students on campus, were a lot quieter with the way they did the activism. People showed up less to protests.
Right.
People didn't want to be seen, to be associated with Palestine protests, right? Because what am I going to get a job in the future, right? Am I this is going to ruin my life? Like I can't engage in this.
Yeah.
And I think there's always going to be a level of risk, right? There's always going to be a level of risk, and I think Prevent was actually this was at UCL. That's my alma mater, UCL. So Prevent often works. It doesn't always work through referrals, right? Sometimes, and often actually, it works through being embedded in processes. For example, policing who can come and speak, right? So we see Islamic societies, we see Palestine societies, their speakers come under a lot more scrutiny. I'll give you a case about that in a second. We see it being subject to, Prevent is involved in the way that disciplinary processes are crafted. Right. So it's not just about the referrals, actually. It's about how is it integrated into the constitution of our universities? How is it integrated into disciplinary process?
Yes.
How is it integrated into university life? And there's lots of different aspects, and it will depend at the university. It takes on the different forms at university. So in terms of the case, I'll tell you.
Yeah. So
this was actually at University of East London. I actually still have the recording of this interaction, and the ISOC there at the time, they were trying to host Cage for an Islamophobia event.
Yeah.
The Students' Union said, you can't have your own hosts, right? So it needs to be a neutral chair.
Yeah.
This was the term that was going around a lot at this time, a neutral chair, because Muslims are, can't, they're not capable of chairing events and keeping things civil, right? This is not something that was in our capacity, apparently.
Yeah.
No external attendees. The event could not be publicized in publicly, externally on social media, only in WhatsApp groups. The students would be subject to ID checks, right? As if there's some kind of securitized border. They would also not be able to say the name of the organization coming.
Wow.
Islamophobia could not be in the title.
Wow.
Of this event.
Yes.
Right. So what is the event now going to be on? Right. And the reason for all of these things was that, because of the risk of students being hateful, potentially being homophobic, potentially being violent, having these kind of aggressive sort of narratives, we're not going to allow you to speak. And this was very damaging, for the integrity of the ISOC. And so actually for ISOCs that sometimes don't engage, if they do have this kind of history, a part of me can sort of sympathize why they don't.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a justification still.
No.
It's a difficult terrain, but I think for the ISOCs, that do fit into this bracket, and they won't be all of them, but I think I do understand from that perspective. And I attended the meeting with the Students' Union when I was in Fosis as a representative, and they pretty much laughed in our faces and said, "Do what you like, go to the media." They acted with impunity. And there is that feeling from university management and Students' Union management that, the Muslims can't organize, they're docile, they're not going to say anything, they maybe pipe up for a little bit, but then they'll quieten down. And because Islamophobia is acceptable,
yes,
right? The government has engaged in it with impunity. Politicians of all levels, in all parties have engaged in it with impunity, right? And because of that, that's a precedent actually for the rest of society. For our educational institutes, right. So I think there's that. That's a strong aspect,
right. So your first point is really important. It's created this aura. Prevent has created this aura. It's an anti-terrorism, an anti-extremism piece of legislation, but it's created an aura, an atmosphere in Muslim communities, and in particular at university campuses, where people have become afraid to engage in protest work, in political work, because the risk is they may be referred to Prevent.
Yes.
Now, that's an external factor.
Yeah.
But in your list, you had some internal factors as well. Explain those internal drives.
So I would also talk about, like I said, this model kind of minority sort of syndrome that I refer to, in that, there are Muslims that they come to university and either conditioning from their parents or just, their own inner leanings, say, I've come to university to learn, to study, and that's it. And it's a very sort of tunnel vision sort of approach to the way they come to university. So, they some of them may engage in the ISOC, some of them won't. But they come, they pray, they study, and they go home. And I think some of that does come from our parents who, whether it be that your parents came from Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Somalia, Nigeria, Gambia, Indonesia, wherever it may be, right? Wherever our parents came from, they came from hardships in a lot of cases, wars, genocides, struggles, economic instability, loads of different problems. And so for them, they've escaped from that and have come here, and they wanted a quiet life, right? And in a lot of cases, our parents actually, in some cases, may have, because these were lands that had a strong colonial influence, right? They may still have some of those colonial parts of that mentality embedded in the way that they are thinking, right? And so, relevant when you look at things, look at things in comparison, right? They've escaped from that and they've come here, and they may say things, things aren't that bad here, right? There's not war. Things are more affordable. You can get a better life. Why are you complaining? Why are you doing this, right? And actually, we've seen that, that older generation sometimes is more amenable to taking the crumbs that the government will give them, right? We've seen it with these, iftars, right? That, Muslims are going and whining and dining, Keir Starmer and politicians who have supported the genocide in Gaza, supported collective punishment. And I think some of that has trickled down, to Muslims in our Islamic societies, to be quite frank with you.
Right.
The third point I'll sort of move on to was I was talking about overly restrictive, and sometimes actually I would say, it might ruffle a few feathers, but I would actually say repressive religious practice that can sometimes happen in ISOCs. And I think, again, this is not applicable to all ISOCs, but it can be prevalent in a few of them, in quite a few of them. And I think that comes down to, I think a lot of it's immaturity.
But explain that. What do you mean by overly restrictive?
So I would say that there are opinions which either have quite strong cultural leanings, and I think when we are in an Islamic society, it's quite diverse, right? We live in the UK, where you have Muslims from, with backgrounds from all over the world coming, right? And I think when opinions are very much laced with cultural opinions and cultural inferences from back home, wherever back home may be,
right?
For those individuals.
Give me an example of something that comes out of this.
Okay, so this thing that women's voice is aura, right? This is quite, this is quite a prevalent opinion in certain ISOCs, that women's voice is aura, so they can't speak at events, right? Another
They've
thing,
got to write little notes to the speaker.
Honestly,
but in their lectures, they speak to their lecturers, right?
Yeah, exactly, right. And they'd engage in seminars and group work, for example.
Yes.
So, with the opposite gender, right? So, and this actually, I've seen in ISOCs where, and it's, I think that kind of, we kind of see these gender wars online, right? I think that's definitely prevalent happening within our ISOCs at the moment, where a lot of women do feel disempowered to engage in politics or to engage in their ISOCs.
Yes.
And I think, again, that depends on the climate. Some ISOCs, especially if there aren't a lot of Muslims in the area, Muslims, at different levels of practicing, right, on different levels at that stage would have to, they'd have no choice but to come together, because the ISOC needs to be a hub and a home for Muslims who are trying to form a community. I find this kind of mindset that I'm talking about, this overly repressive religious practice, it happens in areas when there's an abundance of Muslims. So the structure of the ISOC, tends to be led by a certain type of Muslim, basically. So, and I think from what I've seen, I believe that what's happened is we've started to focus on the outer thing. So how long is your beard, for example? That brother always wears a thobe, for example. Some of these external religious markers, right? And some of them can be important, they are relevant, but I think there's been an over sort of focus on those things. What about your character? What about the way you treat and engage with people, right? I think sometimes what I see, and I think some of it comes from immaturity, right? How much experience do we have of interacting with others? and understanding the thoughts and emotions of others, how much of that comes into it. And I think, you know, when you don't have that life experience and you don't have that immaturity, and sometimes are getting quite poor advice on some of these things, it can lead you, you know, to behave in a way which is repressive. You know, for example, you know, gender separation is something which we see in ISOCs. You know, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, by the way. You know, as Muslims, we have certain things we abide by, right?
Yes.
However, you know, often you will see that the sisters are pushed into the back in certain settings, right? So they can't see the speakers. They may have accessibility needs. And you know that's an aspect I've seen. And if sisters do pipe up, you know, sometimes the responses can be overly harsh.
They're called feminists.
This is another thing, right? So any Muslim that engages in activism, you know, you're a left-wing liberal, right? Any woman or Muslim that stands up for the rights or God-given rights of Muslim women is a feminist, right? And or the brother who does is a white knight, right? And you can quote verses, you can quote hadith, you know, our Quran and Sunnah to some of these people, but because it may be of a certain teacher that they follow, or a certain opinion or certain mindset that they're following, right? They, you know, anything that doesn't come into that, you know, no, you're not part of us. No, this is not the right way to do things. And I'm a convert actually, and I think the beauty of Islam is the fact that, of course, we still have parameters, right? We still have parameters in our faith which we don't cross. But the beauty is that whilst being on the straight path, there are actually many different routes and ways and strategies of approaching these social issues. And something I was always taught by my teachers is that, you know, if you have a strict practice on yourself, you know, that's fine, right? But once you get into a position of leadership and are leading others, if you apply that strict practice, you know, to a large group of people, again, I'm not saying, you know, step over those boundaries and parameters, but if you make that path too narrow, as you have made it for yourself, which is fine for you, it can become overly restrictive on others, and it can actually lead to hardship for those individuals.
So I want to come back to this in a second, but I want to come to your fourth point, which I think is really critical to today's discussion, and that's a depoliticized Islam, or this belief that if you're involved in any form of political activity, you're by definition a socialist or a leftist. To the degree I've noticed that you know, there is a quietism. I mean, that's a term that I'm not sure if it's appropriate or inappropriate,
no, I think
but that's a term that's been used quite often, where the standard default of Islamic societies across this country is not to engage until it becomes impossible but to engage, and the engagement is very superficial, right? Explain where that comes from.
That's a difficult one. I'm not always particularly sure fully where it comes from. I do think there are sects or groups within the Muslim community that take this very quietist sort of approach. You know, don't rebel against the rulers, for example. Don't you know, do things in private. You know, protesting is haram, voting is haram, for example. And I think some of those kind of mindsets actually, you know, this embedding political quietism into our faith, you know, and I think when I look at, you know, when I was studying Islam, when I looked at the Prophet, peace be upon him, you know, and looking at how he managed all the issues of his time, and the Sahaba, you know, as well, how they managed the issues of their time. They were active in their communities. You know, they did speak up. And, you know, for example, I think what we're seeing actually is this. There's a separation now being made between political activism, or whatever you want to call it, be it community work, being active in your communities, advocacy. There is this strain in our community that, you know, people that are trying to separate that from our faith when it is embedded. And I think, you know, activism or being an activist has kind of become a slur in some circles, or one of the activist Muslims or the political Muslims or the liberal Muslims, right? And it's like, you know, wanting better financial provision, you know, for poor communities, you know, is that outside of Islam? You know, wanting better housing, is that outside of Islam? You know, wanting there to not be racism, colorism, anti-blackness, is that outside of Islam? You know, people say, you know, and that's what BLM does, you know, the left-wing sort of BLM groups. No, you know, the Prophet, peace upon him, in his last sermon, you know, he said, there's no superiority of an Arab over a non-Arab,
Yeah.
or a black over a white person, right? The only person who is superior is the one who is pious. And I say, you know, the truly pious person doesn't even recognize their superiority over another because they don't think that of themselves. The humility is there, right? And so there are many, you know, points in our faith, you know, in the Quran and Sunnah, which actually show that, you know, Surah An-Nisa, for example, verse 135, you know, stand for justice, whether it be against yourselves or your parents or your relatives, right? These are things embedded in our faith. A hadith, which I think was one of the strongest things that actually brought me to Islam, right? Because I came to Islam through being in social justice movements, right? And I felt like the spirituality aspect, you know, the aspect of the soul and God was not embedded in those movements, right? They were quite materialistic. And I think this hadith of whosoever sees a wrong, let them change it with their hand.
Yes.
And if they can't do that, let them change it with their tongue. And if they can't do that, at least keep it in your hearts, right? That's the lowest level of iman, right? And we're given levels at which we can do things. These are embedded in our faith. So I don't understand how people can separate and make Islam and advocacy and activism mutually exclusive from one another.
Do you think there are scholars on campus, imams on campus? Because I've heard this.
Yeah, 100%.
Who've said that going to the encampment is haram, or going to a protest is haram, or even praying Jummah at the encampment. is haram.
I've heard these reports.
Right.
It's happening. Right. And they are saying that yes, protesting is haram, and even, you know, women being outside, you know, for, you know, going to the encampments, right, and speaking at them or praying there, all of these kind of things are haram. And this is what I mean in this overly restrictive. If you have this opinion for yourself, I think that's different. But to make that obligatory on others, when there are opinions, you know, many opinions that are differing and on the contrary, I don't think it's right.
But there's a genocide taking place. You know, the encampment movements is probably, I mean, encampment movement and the general protest movement, let's say. It's probably one of the most significant countermeasures to that, and it's changed public opinion around the world, and it's impacted young people. So surely they should be able to see that in such a you know, where the movement has moved so many people, Muslims should be at the center of that. But they're not.
So this is a point I really strongly believe in that, you know, in what we've been seeing of Palestinians in Gaza, faith, Islam has been a strong part of the way they have persisted and resisted what is going on. Right. And I think that isn't controversial. You know, it's no secret. You know, we've actually seen swathes of non-Muslims either wanting to get interested in reading the Quran or Islam, you know, learning about Islam because of what they've seen from the Palestinians in Gaza, because as their families have been killed, as their people have been, you know, relentlessly bombed, they have still hung on to God. They have still hung on to their faith. And that has struck people. It struck deeply in people in a very, you know, godless societies all around the world that people are living in. And I think we should be mirroring that over here. And this is an important time to reflect that call and reflect those actions that we're seeing in Palestine, that we're seeing in Gaza, from Palestinians who are pushing back and who are still pushing through, you know, the genocide that they are going through. We should be the bastions of that kind of movement. Actually, we should actually be taking on strong leadership roles in these encampments. We should be at the forefront, right? Actually, adhering to the call that our brothers and sisters in Gaza and West Bank and Palestine are pushing forward with. We should be standing side to side with them, you know. But instead, where are we? We are cowering away in a lot of cases. You know, there are, by the way, I must say, there are a lot of Muslim students who are active in these encampments. But, and I think ISOCs are now increasingly, you know, few of them are now starting to step out and to get more involved, right? They're stepping outside of those bubbles. I think, you know, and this has been true for years and years and years, decades actually. I do think Muslim students have consistently been on the forefront of movements for justice, whether it be for Palestine, anti-racism, you know, and all these kind of things. However, often the ISOC hasn't been involved, or they've been in opposition, and I think, you know, that's a fact.
And that needs to change, because that's an unacceptable position Islamically. I can't understand. And lots of scholars from a range of schools, Sheikh Haytham, Sheikh Fawad, you know, they've all called this out as being completely unacceptable. Now, Your third and fourth point, I'm just going to, give the counter to that to a degree, because there is a belief that, especially during the BLM movement, but also prior to that, where Muslims got involved with the left, they, instead of making Islam the core of their political activism, they began to develop or adopt the mores of the left. And within time, some of the unacceptable social practice of the left became their own practices. And their mindsets became one which was separate to that of Islam. And I've come across young Muslims like this who would say, Islam is my faith. But very quickly would talk about a theory of justice, which is quite far away from Islam, economically and socially, for example.
Yes, yeah.
So there is a risk there, and a real risk to the iman of young Muslims who interact with, who engage in political activism with this. And we saw that in America in particular, where there was a backlash a few years back against the types of Muslims that were being created or developed out of these movements. So how do you deal with those risks?
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. A lot of the work I do actually, or have done as well, has been working with these Muslims in this kind of middle sort of gray zone, spiritually, where because where there is a critical mass of Muslims, or the ISOC, for example, isn't engaging with things, they've gone out into that sort of political wilderness to try and find a home for themselves, try to find a movement. And a really good book recommendation I have for people listening is Imam Dawood Walid's book, Towards Sacred Activism. I think it's an essential read for any Muslim who's trying to get involved in activism. And I think, the hadith as well, which comes to mind, is the Prophet ﷺ, he said, is that a person is there on their religion of their companions, right? Whoever they're with. And I think the more time you spend with people of whatever political persuasion or spiritual or religious persuasion, you will end up taking on those things. And I think that I don't think there should be any issue with saying that. I think it's important that you share, intimate spiritual space, with Muslims, right? If you are a Muslim, and that should be your the primary thing that you're doing. I don't think that's controversial. No. And I think even people of other political movements would say that they have their own core groups where they do their own thing, right? And I think there is a risk, right? And I think that another thing why some ISOCs don't want to engage is because their risk to their iman, for example, or their risk to their Islamic practice. But I think what we need to do is, and this is I've developed workshops on this, and strategies, is actually how can we be authentically Muslim? And when I say authentically, I mean we're actually people who, in our politics, the Quran and Sunnah is centered in the way we engage, from our political stances, economically, socially, whatever it may be, from the way we conduct ourselves. How do we do those things? And I'm not saying it's easy. I think it's actually quite difficult. But it's more difficult when there's only, there's scattered sort of Muslims in those groups, and we don't come together, as a cohesive group together into those kind of spheres and spaces, right? And are able to put forward, our do's and don'ts, or our red lines, or the way we interact, right? And I think Islam is it's a comprehensive way of living and interacting with the world, right? And I think, yes, some other movements may have certain strategies we can learn from, certain points we can learn from. But again, I think as a Muslim, right, if you, in the fullest sense of the word, Islam should be the primary thing primary religion and way of life that we the deen that we should follow, right? So that would be my point on that.
No, okay, that's good. So there needs to be a critical mass. So your point is, if the Islamic society does not engage in these encampments, then of course the atmosphere then will remain, because one or two Muslims are not going to be able to change that atmosphere and make it conducive to an Islamic atmosphere. So the answer to the potential problem of practices and aspects that may be against our iman is for believers to join it and to change the atmosphere. Have you seen examples? I mean, you've been engaged with, so I spoke earlier about this network of groups, network that you've set up, and I know you're part of it. Have you seen examples of where Islamic societies have engaged in encampments?
I think there is KCL, King's College London, is an example. I think LSE, London School of Economics, is an example.
Yeah.
I believe there's some engagements happening slowly at other places, but those are the two main ones that I know.
Yeah.
There are other unis where the ISOC is kind of trying to find their place in things. I've only named two examples, which I'm completely sure of, but there are other places where the ISOC is now stepping into things, but may not be at the forefront and center of what is going on. And if there are any ISOCs out there, I think, I'm sure there probably are now more where the ISOC is leading on things. And I think it needs to be an environment where our boundaries are not crossed, where we are respected, and we can exist and do our activism as well, without being made to feel like, no, what you're doing is repressive or it's wrong, right? We have our belief system, and I think that should be respected.
I heard at Manchester University, the Islamic Society were very involved in the encampment, and someone took their shahada a few days ago,
alhamdulillah.
Because they saw the exemplary characters of those people involved, and they saw the salah, and they were paying fajr and all of their salah together, and you know and they were melding that very seamlessly with political activism. And a lot of these people, of course, are looking not just for political leadership; they're looking for spiritual leadership. And
exactly. I would have counted myself as one of those people.
Tell us about your journey very quickly.
No, go ahead, inshallah. So for me, I think a critical point in my life was, I've grown up as a young black male in London. I grew up in South London, Southeast London, and I grew up seeing, I experienced racism. I was sort of edged out of 2 schools, kicked out, and I felt like society didn't understand me. I was branded as angry, stupid. Despite me now, practicing medicine, right? I was always, all these negative labels were attached to me. Aggressive, and these are labels which are often attached to black people, especially young black boys. And they see a higher expulsion rate because of these things. And I think I grew up witnessing racism, police brutality. I've been stopped and searched as well. And it was July 5th, 2016, and I was quite apolitical at this point, where I, again, put my head down kind of thing. I would stand up for myself, but I wouldn't engage in wider things, right? Just generally, if you can, just put your head down. And especially, when I was going through secondary school, and July 5th, 2016, I think it was Alton Sterling in America was shot whilst he's a black man who's being restrained by police. He was shot in the back, I think 4 or 5 times, and he died. And I witnessed that. And I've witnessed these videos before, but, it hit me. And again, I just went into that mode of put your head down, just, there's nothing you can do about this. And then the next day, Philando Castile was shot at a traffic stop by police in front of his partner and his daughter. It was streamed on Facebook Live because they were so scared something would happen. And I think the proximity of those 2 acts and witnessing them one day after another, I think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he flicked a switch within me. And since then, it's like I couldn't stop, acting. I said, even if I'm just one person, if I can stand up, if I can act, and I think that also, there's in Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 32, it says, whosoever has saved a life, it's like they saved the whole of humanity. And whosoever has killed someone unjustly, it's like they've killed the whole of humanity. Right. And I think that ripple effect of our actions, and we can, extrapolate that meaning to even one small form of charity, one small form of an intervention, it can have a massive ripple effect actually to people and communities all over the world, because you do that one thing, you can light a light in somebody else, and they can go on and do that for others, right? So that ripple effect is really important. And I think what happened with me was I was engaging a lot of different sort of secular movements or materialistic movements, often within the sort of left-wing space. And I felt like, I was exerting myself, and I wasn't, there was no return in that sense. And this feeling of injustice really started to strike me. I said, how is it that, we would organize against the wrongs that are going on, but often the government or these state actors or institutions, organizations, individuals would get away with it. And I said, how can we live like this? How can there not be any, proper justice? There has to be some kind of divine justice. I was originally raised Christian, but I felt like, the Bible for me was quite inconsistent with its narratives and the Trinity never made sense to me. I was always, when I was in Sunday school, I'd question, from young, how is Jesus the Son of God, but also God at the same time, right? And that didn't go down well in a Nigerian Sunday school, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
So I was looking for that aspect of, centering the soul, centering the spirit. And I didn't know at that time, I was also looking for that aspect of centering God, right? Because when we pray, when we worship God, right? Because our souls were created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? We actually bring ourselves closer to him, and it's completing for us, right? It's nourishing for us.
Yes.
But when we draw away, when we engage in the world without remembering him, we actually cause damage to ourselves that we don't realize. And so I think I read, I looked in different religions, right? I was looking around, I was reading different things, and Islam was actually one I was last on my list, because although I would say at the time I was pushing back against Islamophobia, I think because of all the things I'd heard, from others in the media, it's restrictive, it's so many rules and things like that. I was like, no, I don't want to. But, I remember I was at an event and I was invited, I think it was by the ISOC at the time actually, invited me to come and do like a poetry event, and I said some poetry, and a sister came up to me and just said, just look into Islam. I said, you know what, like what do I have to lose? And I had a lot of Muslim friends at that time. I've also got some extended Muslim family members in Nigeria. There's a lot of intermixing.
Yeah.
So I bought a Quran, and it was Abdul Halim's version, and I read the first surah, second surah, and I think I got up to like the middle of Surah An-Nisa, and I was like, even now, the way I'm talking about it, I was like, I just said, let me take my shahada. I didn't even read the whole Quran, because I said, I know this is the word of God. Like I said, the way it strikes me, the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was talking, the way God was talking, I said, this is the, and the beautiful thing about the Quran is there's not even one contradiction.
Yes.
I've read it, in depth and dissected it twice. I'm doing it for a third time. Each time you read it, there are different meanings, and there's no contradiction. It's a perfect guidance. It's applicable to all people, all times, throughout time and history.
Yes.
Right. Since it was revealed, and I think as Muslims, that should be our guiding light in the world. And I think since then I've been able to make sense of the world. Like for me, everybody has an aspect of justice which they connect to.
Yes.
For me, it's Allah's name of Al-Hakam, of the ultimate judge, right? All of the retribution is within his hands. So all of, Labour, Conservative, all of these parties, all of the political parties that are endorsing this genocide, Joe Biden, all of these politicians, all of these Zionist groups, that are weaponizing anti-Semitism against those who are simply standing against genocide and injustice. All the people that have enabled, anti-black racism, different kinds of discrimination, slavery, looking at my ancestry, it's likely that I may be descended, from enslaved Africans, right? And when you look at all of that, for me, it was too much to think that nothing will come to these people. And when I read, our Quran, and I read the hadith from the Prophet, peace be upon him, and see what he says about what will happen to those people, I feel actually a sense of calm, because I know justice is coming to those people. And I think when we look at what's happening now in this genocide, right, we've seen all of these images, right? These images have struck every person who has a beating heart straight in the middle of their chest, right? You should feel something. If you don't feel something, I don't know what to say for you, right? It struck everybody in the middle of their chest, anybody with a soul, a beating heart and a soul, right? And I think some of these, Israel may think they're going to get away with it. All of their supporters may think they're going to get away with it with all their sort of obfuscating talking points, right? Their media talking points, all these things that they think that will excuse what's happened. And often, when these genocides have ended, South African apartheid, all of these tragedies and events of mass violence, people come back and said, no, we were against that. We won't let them forget. And most of all, Allah is not going to forget. God is not going to forget. He sees everything that is going on, yes, and justice is coming to them. And what Muslims really need to do at this time, we need to be agents of justice in this time, right? We need to be standing at the forefront, like I said before. And our faith, we should use our faith for that. It shouldn't be controversial. It shouldn't be problematic.
Yes.
Our faith allows us to do that, and we should engage with others, right? In being able to do that. That's like you said, the brother who converted, he took his shahada at the encampment. This is what can happen when people see the way we conduct ourselves, right? When they see our behavior, when they see, no, Islam is a religion of justice. It's a religion of many things, but justice is one of them.
Yeah.
Right. And actually, the strategies that we develop in our communities when we use Islam in that way, it can contribute, to political change in our society, right? To political engagement, and inshallah that's the case.
Yes.
And I think we as Muslims, I think it's really important that I think there are political strategies, in different parts of the world, and I think the older generation, coming from where all the places that they did, may try and superimpose that here. And I think it's important that we actually create homegrown British strategies of engagement that utilizes Islam, that embodies Islam, and engages with those within our communities. And I think we need to be imaginative with that, and we need to be creative with that, and it's very possible, right? I think it's very, very possible.
I mean, that's fantastic. Jazakallah khairan. What you've described there is really amazing. So, you were someone who was looking for justice, and you were involved in political work and activism, or you wanted to be involved in these spaces, and you found Islam through that prism. So how then do you describe, Muslim students today who see what's happening in Gaza, and they see the horrendous strain upon which, the horrendous slaughter that is meted out on them by the Israelis, yet they're not involved in activism of any sort. The encampments, maybe it's just one iteration, one form of activism. Maybe that's not for everyone, right? There may be some people who can't do that.
Of course, I understand that. Yeah.
But they're not seeking redress by any other means yet. They have this iman that you have and that I have. Like, how do you understand that dilemma or that contradiction in your iman, or how you view your iman and how they view iman?
Yeah. I think, honestly, God knows best what is in their hearts. I think what I can mostly comment on is actions and behaviors, right? Yes. And I think that it comes down to this, separation that's been created, and this otherization of activism from our faith, that, it's not part of it. And I think that, we have many tools within our faith. Dua is important.
Yes.
All of these different things must be coupled together. All of these different points and ways of pushing back, of resisting, should be coupled together. Dua is an instrumental part of that. But so is, and there are scholars who have said we can go to protests. Obviously, remember your salahs and things, be mindful of what you're doing and the risk you're taking, right? But you can go to protests. And even when we look at Gazans in Palestine and Palestinians in West Bank and Gaza, when we look at what they've been saying, they said, I've heard it from quite a few Palestinians and others with connections to Palestine, that one of the few things keeping them going is seeing all of these protests, seeing young people standing up, people who are still trying to get their degrees, standing up and taking that risk for them, right? And I think about it, and I don't know, what are you scared of, right? Are you scared of potentially some disciplinary or some kind of repercussion, And on level, maybe I can understand that, right? I know there are even, people who are working, maybe scared of losing your job or something like that. I think we need to toughen up and take some more risk. I'm not saying go out there and, put yourself in jeopardy, put your livelihood in jeopardy as the primary goal of what you're trying to do. That's not what I'm saying. Yeah. I'm saying the things we fear, are not comparable to the things that Palestinians are fearing right now, right? They are fearing their family members being blown to bits, bombs every day, food, not having food and water, right? For the most part, we have these things, and we actually live in a lot of, comparatively, right? We have, things that they don't have over there, that they are not, even I know there is poverty in the Muslim community, don't get me wrong, but I think even being able to have some sort of access to 3 square meals in a day, right? I remember seeing that Palestinians were breaking their fast of grass, in Ramadan,
Yes.
right? And you see for a lot, quite a few Muslims would have like big platters and things. There is a part of the Muslim community that engages in a lot of opulence, for example, and kind of excess, right? And I think we've prioritized livelihoods over lives. That's something I've been saying, right? Livelihoods over lives, right?
Yeah.
Look at the lives that are being lost, that are being murdered and killed.
Yeah.
We need to do something about this. And I think I've spoken about how these things are embedded in our faith. I think if you're following the scant opinions of a few scholars, but like I said, scholars from all sides, all different sides have come forward and said, actually, there is a precedent, within our faith to be able, because I know some ISOCs are worried about the fiqh perspective. Is this allowed?
Yes.
Right. And I think, you shouldn't be restrictive on yourself, restricting yourself to only a fair few sort of small corners of opinions, right? There are many scholars who have come out and said, yes, you can go to protests.
Yes.
Right. You can engage in this action and that action. And okay, if the encampment is not for you, right, there are other ways, right? Try to understand your university constitution, pass motions within your students' union councils. Try and get motions passed at your university councils for BDS policies, for ethical divestment policies. And I think sometimes ISOCs want to preserve their relationship with the institution, right? And they put that over. Sometimes you do have to rock the boat.
Yes.
Right? You do have to rock the boat in order to get some actions.
Or about your prayer rooms. I've heard now from a number of ISOC people that the universities may remove their prayer rooms if they get involved in activism. And isn't it better for the long-term well-being of Muslim students that we maintain a prayer space for Muslims?
So in my time as in Fosis, and even after that, you know, I dealt with cases where prayer rooms were about to be removed.
Yeah.
The thing is, there's always going to be so this aspect of prayer rooms, or the privileges that we are giving you Muslim students, you ISOCs, if you don't do this, fall in line. This has been utilized with a lot of different issues, before this time.
Yeah.
And it's always going to be a threat in a lot of campuses to get you to toe the line and to walk within a very sort of narrow sort of path within university, so that you don't dissent. It's very in line actually with this new extremism definition.
Yeah.
Basically, that any Muslim who engages in politics or dissents from repressive and oppressive government opinion and policy, you will be labeled as an extremist, and we will take your civil rights away from you, your civil liberties. Right? And we're seeing this now. This is superimposed on campuses, and it has been for a very long time.
Right.
If you don't do anything now, in the future, when you need, another need comes up, and it may not be that a genocide is going on. It may be that a case of Islamophobia happened on your university. They will utilize this again. They will keep using it to whip you into shape. And eventually you have to say enough is enough, and you have to grow a backbone, because whatever you want to do that dissents from what the university is asking for, or what their policy may be, and policies are there to be changed, in my opinion, right? And to be lobbied against, and to be there for new policies to be implemented. Whatever you do, if you dissent from that or disagree, they will hold this over you.
Yeah.
So when are you going to say enough is enough? This is the time to say enough is enough.
Yes.
Right? And there are organizations that can help with that. Right? CAGE is a really good one, right? There's the Islamophobia response unit, who are amazing, right? There are a lot of different organizations. I know Muslim Association of Britain is doing some things. MEND is also quite active. Their Prevent Watch is another one, right? They're actually a conglomerate of Muslim organizations that are, trying to do what is just, right? Trying to help students or Muslims in society who are going through hardship, utilize those. Fosis, in my time, was very active on this, and I think they kind of took a step back actively, consciously from this. Yeah. And I hear they're sort of reinvigorating this. And so
why did they take a step back?
From my understanding, and I think, again, this is something that we see in other ISOCs as well. And I think it will also be good for them to speak for themselves. But I think from my understanding, a kind of this risk to the iman of students, and political risk, socio-political risk to Muslim students as well on their campuses, just like I've spoken about, if you do this, your prayer will be taken away. And I know one of the biggest reasons is also the way that the former president of NUS, Shema Delali, was treated,
Yes.
right, were conscious reasons for them to pull back. But I think, again, these are always going to be risks. There's always going to be something at stake.
Yeah.
And something that we did in my time is we had, mentorship for Muslim student sabbatical officers. So sabbatical officers are students that have run in local elections in their university to be an officer in their students' union. They create policy, they speak to the vice chancellors, they can redirect funding into certain areas, for Muslims or for disabled students, students of color. They can be very instrumental, actually. And ISOCs, I recommend they connect with Muslim sabbatical officers or sabbatical officers in students' unions that are willing to help them, form those relationships, right? That's another avenue. But going back to your point, I think there was always going to be this risk. And I don't think it's good enough, right? I understand, in a way I do understand, but because of the community we are as Muslims, because of the way the government and policy is trying to push down on us and push us down and oppress us, there's always going to be these kind of stakes. Mm-hmm. And I think, there's always an ebb and flow depending on the ISOC, depending on the organization, whether it's Fosis or another ISOC or another organization. Mm-hmm. There tends to be often this ebb and flow of, a spike in levels of activism, and then a drop or a conscious sort of drawback. And I think we need to look at sustaining that. Yeah. Right. This is not to put it on individuals, right? To blame individuals in that sense. But I think it's a community mentality on the national level, on the local level, and actually on the individual level as well, that we all need to cultivate. And I think going to NUS, actually, they are one of the most oppressive institutions we have in the student space at the moment.
Islamophobic?
Very Islamophobic. If we look at the treatment of Shema Delali, for example, she found out about her sacking through social media.
Right.
They didn't even have the...
So she was the former elected president of the NUS.
Yes, she was.
She was sacked as president because of a tweet she sent out when she was younger.
Yes, exactly.
And it was about the Palestine conflict. Her case has just recently been settled. But the NUS spent over £1 million.
Spent a lot of money, hundreds of thousands of pounds. I'm not sure of the exact figure, but I know they spent hundreds of thousands of pounds, investigating.
Right.
I mean, if we actually look at that, the people that were accusing her, principally the Union of Jewish Students,
right?
They are a pro-Zionist lobby group. They're not. I think they like to present themselves. They just had a meeting with the Prime Minister and Vice Chancellors, trying to present themselves as good faith actors. They have hounded Muslim and pro-Palestine students and student societies on campuses for decades, weaponizing anti-Semitism against them, utilizing Islamophobic and racist tropes against these students, right? Actually contributing to securitization and disciplinary processes for these students like they did for Shema, right? And, their ex-president, Nina Friedman, there's a video of her in the last few years from the ex-president of the Union of Jewish Students. She's now an external affairs manager in the Ministry of Justice in the UK, by the way. She's literally caught on video boasting about how there are many alumni from the Union of Jewish Students who are now part of high levels of the Israeli government's office, the IDF, the Israeli defense forces, different parts of the Israeli government, right? And so they actually have many alumni basically feeding into this genocide that we're seeing now,
right,
at instrumental levels, right? And so how is it that an organization which, has actually contributed to facilitating what we're seeing going on, right? They've fed people into the levels of that institution, of the Israeli state, which is actually oppressing and killing, massacring Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. How are we allowing them to come into our campuses to dictate what is right and what is wrong?
But how then do you combat that? If the NUS is deeply Islamophobic, maybe there is a case to say that we work externally from the NUS. I mean, is there still a case to argue that Muslims should be more involved and should be sabbatical officers at a local level, but also is there a potential for Muslims still to engage in some form of political activism within the NUS structures?
I think that's a difficult one because of the Muslims, and I was part of the NUS at one point actually. The way I see it is that NUS, because there is, so a Union of Jewish Students is the only affiliate organization, I believe, to NUS.
Yeah.
And so within Shema's disciplinary process, they were, they were actually quite instrumental in how the investigation looked. They were consulted around it. I think they even played a part in choosing who would investigate as well, right? Even though there were accusations of racism and Islamophobia towards them.
Yeah.
And I think pushing back against them, we need coordinated efforts. We need our organizations, especially student organizations, that includes Fosis, right? Creating strategies against them, against what they're doing, mobilizing. And again, that risk comes into it as well, because there are students who will fear that accusation of anti-Semitism, right? I think the world is waking up that
things have moved on.
Exactly, that this especially when we look at the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, of IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, right? Israel is such a huge part of the examples of what could be, criticizing Israel is such a huge part of what could constitute anti-Semitism. On campuses, we need to push back against that and get that repealed. I think it should be repealed.
So it's currently NUS define anti-Semitism according to that IHRA definition.
I believe so, yeah. And they have done for a few years. I don't know whether the policy is still ongoing. I think it may have lapsed, but I think it is something that they do utilize.
Right.
And I think it means that students who criticize Israel could be, under the constitution of their university, seen as being anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
Although this is an ongoing conversation at different campuses, and a lot of academics under academic freedoms have said that this does constrict your academic freedoms. And I think students should be, and ISOC should be, collaborating with, trade unions like the UCU, the Academics Union.
Yes.
They should be collaborating with academics, who have more power and standing, and staff members who have more power and standing within their institutions, to give them that protection and to also give them that knowledge and experience to be able to access those spaces, right? And I think IHRA is something that, needs to be pushed back against, because there are some campuses where they are trying to use it in disciplinary processes, despite, world-renowned lawyers, and even one of the people who comprise the IHRA saying it shouldn't be used for disciplinary processes. It's actually being used for the opposite of what it was intended for. Right, it wasn't intended to be a punitive definition like we're seeing now, right? So that we need to vote against this in our students' unions, on our university councils. We need to remove it from constitutions. There are other definitions of anti-Semitism which don't encroach on Palestinian freedoms. They don't encroach on being able to criticize Israel, right? Or call Israel an apartheid state, a racist state, which it is. These are things of fact, right? And I think it's looking at the history of how we came here, right? With these institutions, UJS, NUS, right, and forming strategies that take that into account. And these need to be cohesive strategies, which, we don't have this ebbing and flowing, these peaks and troughs of activities, right? Actually, stable intervention, stable strategy, stable levels of action that are sustained through the years.
Sorry.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
So it seems to me that if you want to maintain this sustainable type of activism on university campuses, that there really needs to be a body of students who've gone through this, like recent students who've gone through the university life, who've been able to deal with some of these challenges, so that we don't carry on making the same mistakes.
Exactly,
because of course, you have got a situation where you're there for 3 or 4 years and then you leave, right? And so the new set of students will make similar mistakes. So is there a coordinated effort at this stage, like on the level of the UJS? Of course, the UJS is extremely coordinated because it gets its money from an external state, and its activities are sometimes directed by that external state. But is there an equivalent yet in the UK for Muslim students?
I think there are organizations which in the past have set out to do that. And I think at times Fosis has actually been, at the center of doing what you're saying.
Yeah.
However, I think there is, and I think this is what Muslim Students for Palestine does, because you do also need students who aren't, or people who aren't currently students right now.
Yeah.
Right. Contributing to things.
Yeah.
And I think it's connecting all of these organizations that have a stake in what is going on.
So explain the work of Muslim Students for Palestine. Yeah.
Okay. So at the moment, what it's doing, it's connecting ISOCs, it's connecting Muslim students who are either involved in the encampments or want to be involved or leading the encampments.
Yeah.
To, legal help, to help with policy and messaging, communications, understanding understanding, how Islamophobia is on your campus, understanding how to negotiate with the university and not negotiate sort of, accepting crumbs and empty platitudes, negotiating through actually formulated strategies which draw upon the history and the climate of your institution and are able to press on those points which actually lead to action. Right. And that's very specific depending on the campus you're at.
Yeah.
Dealing with any cases of Islamophobia that may be happening at the encampment or not. Merging, Islamic perspectives and Islamic ways of activism with what is going on at the encampments. Right. So like I said, we can actually be leading and involved in these encampments in a way that we can do this freely, exist freely, and not have our boundaries crossed as well, which I think is important, and be respected, have our beliefs respected. So these are some of the things that it's offering, right? And also I think, which is really important, is offering speakers, but also fiqh advice, right? For the ISOCs. And again, I think some of that is valid, right? For the ISOCs who are worried about those fiqh implications, right? That some of those scholarly implications, that those bits of information, I understand that, and actually giving them that kind of rolling advice from in-house scholars who are involved with the project or who were connected to, as to how do you navigate this political issue, right? So trying to give essentially quite a comprehensive service, and it's not coming necessarily from the individuals who are within Muslim Students for Palestine. We're connecting as well, drawing on the resources of different organizations or individuals who have those areas of expertise, and trying to make a sort of central point of gathering for those resources, for these actions that we can then give, as a package to Muslim students, to Islamic societies, to embolden them and empower them to be able to take these actions that are necessary for us to take.
Jazakallah khair. I mean, it's fantastic work that you're doing here. Are you hopeful? Do you feel that Gaza is enough of a catalyst to change this quietist mindset on student campuses, so that we can show the best of our Islam and the best of our political side, our activist side on campuses? Are we at that stage yet?
I think it's hard to say. I hope so.
Yeah.
I do hope so. But I think, I haven't visited every ISOC. There's over 120 or so, probably even more than that.
Yeah.
There's also ISOCs in sort of sixth form further education colleges, right? So there's so many different environments. So it's hard to say without having, gone to a good amount of them, and really been immersed in what is going on at each different campus. It's quite difficult to do that.
Yeah.
But I hope so. My sincere hope is that inshallah that we do see a change, and people, and I am seeing signs of people waking up, of whether it be, we need to engage more within our universities or with political structures. I think this idea, and we saw it with the way that there were people within Labour or adjacent to Labour saying, Labour shaking off the fleas, right? When it comes to Labour losing the Muslim vote, for example, right? And I think universities as well, they often do not comply with the demands or requests of Muslim students, because they see that, okay, the Zionist pressure is more. A lot of these universities don't actually care about these issues. Some universities will have Zionist vice chancellors, or those who are big supporters of Israel. But in my experience, a lot of them don't care. They care about their financial reputation and their sort of social capital and reputation.
Yes.
And we need to start targeting those things. And I think we just need to remember that we do have power, within our faith, within ourselves. I actually, within ISOCs and within just general Muslim students, I've met so many competent organizers,
Right.
fast learners, people who are intuitive, creative, strategic. They are able to adapt very quickly. We've got resources, right? We've got how many knowledgeable Muslim doctors do we have? Muslims in tech, Muslims in healthcare, nurses, midwives, Muslims in engineering, Muslims in the creative scene, right? Journalism, right? The arts.
Yes.
So many areas. And unfortunately, a lot of us study and then, a lot of us say, look, this is a mentality, right? I'll keep my head down for now. And then when I've graduated, I will, I'll start doing things. That often doesn't happen because you start having to pay bills, you have kids, the weight of all of these responsibilities comes down on you. And actually we need to start from when we are students. I don't think it's ever too late to start.
Yeah.
I think if you think there are burdens on you now, wait till you graduate, right? Life, can become, more difficult. Right? And I think actually this is the time when you are a student, when you have less of these things, to stand up and start that activism, that advocacy from now, to start doing those things from now. I think this is the time. Yes. Don't be scared. I myself, I think Zionists have tried to kick me out of uni on 2 occasions, right? And here I am. I'm working, I'm talking to you, right? And if there is legal support. There are people to reach out to, right? I've named those organizations, right? Cage, Prevent Watch, Islamophobia Response Unit. You may have, they can connect you to lawyers. They can connect you to help. I've helped actually quite a few students, Muslim and non-Muslim, through disciplinaries in the last sort of 6-7 months. Right. And none of them have been expelled or suspended. I know there are some in other places that have been. Yes. But in the case, and I've dealt with a lot of cases over the years, a lot of them actually don't get kicked out or expelled, right? It's a process of intimidation. Right. It's a process of silencing you. That is the result that they want. Best case scenario for them is that you get kicked out, but it often doesn't happen. Yes. And if they don't get that, well, if you never speak about Palestine again, you never tweet about it again, you never even repost anything again, or you keep your activism so quiet that no one can see or hear it. It's not even making a mark on anybody else around you. Yes. Then we've done our job. That is what supporters of Israel want to do. That is what Zionists would like to do. They'd like to silence you. So reach out for help. There are organizations, there are people, and again, I'm not saying go out there and be silly and take unnecessary. I'm not saying take unnecessary, unstrategic risk. I'm saying take calculated risks. Stand up for what is right. Because look at what we're seeing in Palestine. That for me is always what I come back to. Look at what the things we have witnessed over the past few weeks and months. Yeah. That should move you. If it doesn't move you, you need to ask yourself why. There's a problem there if it's not moving you. The images I've seen, they're unforgettable. Yeah. I'm sure it's going through your mind and the mind of listeners at the moment. It's absolutely unforgettable, absolutely, piercing, and that needs to spark you into action. This has to be the time.
Dr. Ayo Khalil, it's really been a pleasure speaking to you today. A wonderful conversation. Jazakallah khair, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair for having me, and it was beautiful to be here. Allah bless you and the podcast and all the listeners, inshallah.
Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels, and head over to our website thinkingmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair.